The fiery autumn leaves swirled around Fiona Valenti as she stepped off the stagecoach in Georgetown, Colorado, clutching her worn carpetbag with trembling fingers. It was 1876, and the mining town nestled in the Clear Creek Valley stood as her last hope after fleeing the suffocating whispers of Boston society. Her copper-red hair unbound and catching the late afternoon sunlight immediately drew stares from the townsfolk gathered near the station. "Looks like the devil himself sent us a witch." A man spat on the ground near her boots, loudly enough for others to hear. Fiona lifted her chin, her green eyes flashing with a practiced defiance that masked the familiar ache in her chest. 22 years of such comments had taught her to build walls around her heart, even as each stone weighed her down further. "Pay him no mind, miss." The stagecoach driver handed down her second bag. "Folks round here ain't used to seeing hair quite so vibrant." Georgetown bustled with the energy of a town experiencing the tail end of a silver boom. Men in dusty work clothes hurried past ladies in practical frontier dresses, while shopkeepers called out to potential customers. Fiona straightened her simple blue traveling dress, painfully aware of how her flame-colored hair marked her as an outsider more effectively than any foreign accent could have. She needed to find her aunt's boarding house before nightfall. Aunt Martha was her mother's cousin, not a true aunt, but the only person who'd responded to Fiona's desperate letters after her parents' deaths had left her with mounting debts and few options. "Excuse me," she approached an older woman arranging fabric in a shop window. "Could you direct me to Martha Holloway's boarding house?" The woman's eyes widened at the sight of Fiona's uncovered hair. "You'll want to go up Rose Street, dear, third building past the assayer's office." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "You might consider a bonnet in this town. Some folks are superstitious." "Thank you," Fiona replied, her voice steady despite the familiar advice. Her bonnet had been stolen from her luggage during the journey, and she'd spent her last dollars on food rather than a replacement. As she made her way through the town, Fiona felt the weight of stares and whispers following her. Georgetown was supposed to be her fresh start, yet already the shadows of her past were creeping forward. In Boston, the whispers about her witch's hair had cost her a teaching position and, eventually, any hope of a respectable marriage. The boarding house stood as a beacon of potential sanctuary, a 3-story wooden structure with lace curtains in the windows and a small, well-tended garden out front. Fiona had nearly reached the gate when a group of young men emerged from the saloon across the street. "Lord Almighty, would you look at that?" one called out. "Hair like hellfire itself. Better be careful, boys," another laughed. "My grandma said women with hair that color steal men's souls while they sleep." Fiona quickened her pace, but her foot caught on an uneven board in the walkway. She stumbled, her carpetbag tumbling to the ground, spilling her meager possessions onto the dusty street. Mortified, she dropped to her knees, scrambling to collect her things as the men's laughter grew louder. "Need some help there, madam?" A deep voice cut through the jeers. Fiona looked up to see a tall man standing between her and the group across the street. The setting sun silhouetted him, casting his face in shadow, but she could make out broad shoulders under a worn leather vest, a gun belt around his hips, and a cowboy hat held respectfully in his hands. "I can manage," she replied automatically, reaching for a book that had fallen open in the dirt. The stranger knelt beside her anyway, gathering her scattered belongings with careful hands. "Don't mind those fools," he said, voice low enough that only she could hear. "They haven't seen anything beautiful enough to recognize it when it appears." When he handed her the last item, a silver hairbrush that had been her mother's, their fingers brushed. For the first time, Fiona looked directly into his face. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 25, with sun-darkened skin that spoke of days spent outdoors, clear blue eyes, and a jawline dusted with stubble. "Thank you, mister?" She let the question hang between them. Archer. Jacob Archer. He stood, offering her his hand. Everyone calls me Jake. Fiona hesitated before taking his hand, allowing him to help her to her feet. Fiona Valenti. Jake nodded toward the boarding house. You staying with Martha? She's my aunt. Well, not exactly my aunt, but Martha's good people. He handed her the carpet bag, now refilled with her belongings. Best cook in Georgetown, too. The door to the boarding house opened, revealing an older woman with gray-streaked brown hair pulled into a practical bun. Fiona? Fiona Valenti? Is that you? She hurried down the steps, her face lighting with recognition. Oh, look at you, child. You're the spitting image of your mother. Martha Holloway embraced Fiona, then held her at arm's length, examining her with misty eyes. It's been too many years. You were just a little thing when I last saw you. She noticed Jake standing nearby. Mr. Archer, are you bothering my niece already? Jake grinned, settling his hat back on his head. Just being neighborly, Mrs. Holloway. His eyes found Fiona's again. Welcome to Georgetown, Miss Valenti. As he tipped his hat and turned to leave, Fiona heard one of the men across the street call out, Better watch yourself, Archer. That red hair is a warning. Jake stopped, turned slowly, and fixed the speaker with a gaze that made the man take a step back. That red hair, he said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, matches the fire in my soul, Crawford. You'd do well to remember that. The statement hung in the air as Jake continued down the street, leaving Fiona staring after him in stunned silence. No one had ever defended her hair before, let alone compared it to something within themselves, something valuable and fierce. Well, Martha said, guiding Fiona toward the house with a knowing smile. That's certainly a first. Jake Archer doesn't say more than 3 words to most folks. Fiona felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the late summer heat. He seems kind. Martha laughed. Kind isn't the word most used for him. Capable, dangerous sometimes, fair always, but kind is new. She ushered Fiona inside. Come on, dear. Let's get you settled. You look like you could use a hot meal and a good night's rest. The boarding house was warm and smelled of fresh bread and something savory simmering in the kitchen. For the first time since leaving Boston, Fiona felt her shoulders relax. Perhaps Georgetown would offer her the new beginning she so desperately needed, and maybe, just maybe, there was one person here who saw her fiery red hair not as a curse, but as something that resonated with his very soul. Martha showed Fiona to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor, with a window overlooking the mountains that embraced Georgetown. It's not much, Martha apologized, but it's yours for as long as you need it. It's perfect, Fiona assured her, running her fingers over the handmade quilt that covered the iron bedstead. After the cramped quarters on the stagecoach and the nights spent in noisy hotels along the way, this quiet room felt like luxury. Supper's in an hour, Martha said, moving toward the door. You can freshen up and join us downstairs. The other boarders will be eager to meet you. When Martha left, Fiona sank onto the bed, exhaustion washing over her. She allowed herself a moment of weakness, a single tear tracking down her cheek as she thought of the journey that had brought her here, her parents' deaths from influenza last winter, the discovery of her father's debts, the whispers that followed her through Boston streets, and finally, the desperate decision to come west. She had promised herself a new beginning, and meeting Jake Archer, a man who saw beauty where others saw only strangeness, felt like an omen. A good one for once. After washing the travel dust from her face and hands, Fiona pinned up her hair in a simple knot, trying to make it less noticeable. She changed into her one good dress, a forest green that complemented her coloring, and headed downstairs to meet her new housemates. The dining room held a large oak table where 6 people were already seated. Conversation halted as Fiona entered, all eyes turning to her and most lingering on her hair. "Everyone," Martha announced, emerging from the kitchen with a steaming pot. "This is my niece, Fiona Valenti. She's come all the way from Boston to join us." An older gentleman with spectacles stood, pulling out an empty chair. "Edward Tompkins, miss. Town librarian. Delighted to meet you." Fiona smiled gratefully, taking the offered seat. "A librarian? I adore books." "Then we shall get along famously," Edward beamed. The others introduced themselves: Sarah Williams, a young widow who worked at the Mercantile; the Peterson siblings, Harriet and John, who ran the town newspaper; and Dr. Michael Foster, the town's physician. Each was polite if slightly reserved. "Fiona will be staying with us indefinitely," Martha explained as she served the stew. "And she'll be helping me with the boarding house." "Actually," Fiona interjected, "I was hoping to find teaching work. I was assistant to a schoolmistress in Boston." Dr. Foster looked up with interest. "Our schoolteacher, Miss Bennett, is expecting a child and plans to retire once she's married next month. The town council's been searching for a replacement." Hope fluttered in Fiona's chest. "That sounds perfect. Who should I speak with?" "Mayor Donovan handles school appointments," John Peterson said, buttering a roll. "But fair warning, he's a traditional sort. Might take some convincing to hire an unmarried woman from back east. Especially one who looks like the devil's handmaiden," Harriet muttered, just loud enough to be heard. A heavy silence fell over the table. Martha slammed a serving spoon down. "Harriet Peterson, I won't have that kind of talk at my table. Fiona is my family." Harriet flushed. "I'm only saying what others will. You know how people talk." "I'm quite familiar with how people talk," Fiona said evenly, though her hands trembled in her lap. "I assure you, there's nothing devilish about me except perhaps my temper when provoked." Dr. Foster chuckled, breaking the tension. "Well said, Miss Valenti. And for what it's worth, I think the school could use someone with spirit." The conversation shifted to town news: the declining output from the silver mines, the upcoming harvest festival, and the recent trouble with cattle rustlers plaguing ranches in the area. "That's why Archer was in town today," John explained. "His ranch lost a dozen head last week. He came to talk to Sheriff Miller about forming a posse." Fiona's attention sharpened at Jake's name. "Mr. Archer owns a ranch?" Sarah nodded. "The North Star, about 5 miles outside town. One of the most successful operations in the county, despite him running it mostly alone since his father passed." Alone? Fiona couldn't imagine managing such a venture single-handedly. "He has a few hands," Edward clarified, "but not nearly enough. Pride keeps him from admitting he needs help, I suspect." "It's not pride," Dr. Foster corrected. "It's practicality. With silver production down, most men are leaving the area, not settling in. Can't hire help that isn't there." As the meal concluded, Fiona offered to help with the dishes, but Martha shooed her away. "You've had a long journey. Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll see about getting you that teaching position." Sleep came quickly to Fiona that night, and her dreams were filled with open skies, mountain vistas, and piercing blue eyes that saw beyond her fiery hair to the person beneath. The next morning, Fiona dressed carefully in her most professional attire: a navy blue skirt and jacket with a crisp white shirtwaist. She arranged her hair in a tight, severe bun, covering as much of the vibrant color as possible with pins and combs. "You look like you're facing a firing squad, not a job interview," Martha commented when Fiona came downstairs. "First impressions matter," Fiona replied, adjusting her cuffs. "Especially for someone like me." Martha's expression softened. "Child, you can't hide who you are forever. Not even here. I'm not hiding, Fiona insisted. I'm adapting. Georgetown's town hall was a modest two-story building of local stone, housing the mayor's office, the sheriff's department, and a small courtroom. Fiona squared her shoulders before entering, mentally rehearsing her qualifications. Mayor Harold Donovan was a portly man with an impressive mustache and the air of someone accustomed to having his opinions respected. He listened to Fiona's request with narrowed eyes, occasionally glancing at her carefully covered hair. Miss Valenti, while your education is impressive, we typically prefer our school teachers to be settled individuals, married women or widows of mature years. Fiona had anticipated this objection. In Boston, I taught children from diverse backgrounds, including immigrant families who spoke little English. I developed methods to ensure every child could learn, regardless of their starting point. Georgetown is not Boston, the mayor said dismissively. No, sir, it isn't. But children are children everywhere, and education is the foundation of any community's future. Fiona leaned forward slightly. I understand your concerns about my youth and marital status. I propose a trial period 1 month. If at the end of that time, you find my teaching inadequate or my character unsuitable, I'll step aside without argument. Mayor Donovan tugged at his mustache, considering. Miss Bennet won't leave until her wedding 3 weeks from now. I suppose you could observe her classes until then, learn our curriculum. If she approves of you taking her place, the council might be persuaded. It wasn't a firm offer, but it was an opening. Fiona stood, extending her hand. Thank you, Mayor Donovan. I won't disappoint you. As she left the town hall, Fiona felt a small measure of victory. The path forward wasn't clear, but at least there was a path. Miss Valenti. The familiar deep voice startled her. Jake Archer stood across the street, leading a magnificent bay horse. He crossed to join her, the horse following obediently. Mr. Archer. Fiona nodded politely, suddenly conscious of her severe hairstyle and formal attire. Job hunting? He asked, nodding toward the town hall. Yes, I've spoken with the mayor about taking over as schoolteacher when Miss Bennet leaves. Smart man taking you on. Jake's eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He hasn't exactly hired me yet. I'm on probation. Jake frowned. Donovan's always been slow to recognize good fortune when it presents itself. He patted his horse's neck. This is Mercury, by the way. Fastest horse in the county. The horse nudged Fiona's shoulder with his muzzle, making her laugh. He's beautiful. He knows it, too. Jake studied her for a moment. You look different today. Self-consciously, Fiona touched her tightly pinned hair. More respectable, I hope. Is that what you were going for? There was something in his tone, not quite disapproval, but perhaps disappointment. Before Fiona could respond, a commotion erupted down the street. A wagon was careening out of control, the terrified horses bolting straight toward the town square where several children were playing. Jake reacted instantly, vaulting onto Mercury's back without using the stirrups. Get those kids clear, he shouted to Fiona, then spurred his horse toward the runaway wagon. Without hesitation, Fiona lifted her skirts and ran toward the children, shouting warnings. She reached them seconds before the wagon would have, herding them onto the boardwalk and shielding the smallest with her body. Jake, meanwhile, had galloped ahead of the runaway team. In a move of breathtaking skill, he turned Mercury sharply in front of the panicked horses, forcing them to veer away from the busy part of town. Leaping from his own mount to the wagon seat, he seized the reins, using his considerable strength to bring the frightened animals under control. By the time the wagon slowed to a stop, a crowd had gathered. The owner, a farmer named Wilson, rushed forward, profusely thanking Jake for saving his livelihood and possibly lives. Wasn't just me, Jake said, jumping down from the wagon. Miss Valenti got the children to safety. All eyes turned to Fiona, who stood surrounded by the children she'd protected. In the commotion, her carefully pinned hair had come loose, tumbling in fiery waves around her shoulders. For a moment there was silence. Then, Mrs. Wilson pushed through the crowd and embraced Fiona tearfully. My youngest was among them. Thank you for your quick thinking, miss. One by one, parents claimed their children, each offering gratitude to Fiona. Mayor Donovan stood at the edge of the crowd, watching with an unreadable expression. When the excitement had died down, Jake approached Fiona, leading Mercury. You moved faster than I thought possible in that getup, he said, eyes twinkling. Fiona laughed, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance. I think I've ruined any chance of looking respectable today. Good, Jake said firmly. Respectability is overrated compared to courage. Mayor Donovan cleared his throat, having approached without either noticing. Miss Valenti, that was quick thinking. The school board meets tomorrow afternoon. I think we should discuss your appointment then, rather than waiting for Miss Bennett's departure. Fiona's eyes widened. Thank you, Mayor. I'll be prepared. As Donovan walked away, Jake leaned closer. See? Sometimes you have to let people see who you really are. His gaze lingered on her unconstrained hair, a warmth in his eyes that made her breath catch. Fiona realized that in the chaos, for the first time in years, she'd forgotten to be self-conscious about her appearance. I should get back to the boarding house, she said, reluctant to end their conversation but aware of the curious onlookers. I need to prepare for tomorrow. I'll walk you, Jake offered, falling into step beside her, Mercury following behind. Been meaning to speak with Martha about supplying her kitchen with beef for the winter anyway. As they walked through town, Fiona was acutely aware of the whispers and stares, but now, they seemed different. She heard murmurs about her bravery, not her hair, and walking beside Jake Archer, with his commanding presence and open admiration, made the few remaining hostile glances easier to ignore. At the boarding house gate, Jake hesitated. There's a social at the church Saturday evening. Dancing, food, that sort of thing. He adjusted his hat nervously. I'm not much for town gatherings usually, but I thought, maybe you'd like to go. Fiona felt a flutter of surprise and pleasure. I'd like that very much, Mr. Archer. Jake, he corrected, a slow smile spreading across his face. If we're going to a dance together, you should probably call me Jake. Jake, she repeated, returning his smile. And I'm Fiona. He tipped his hat. Until Saturday, Fiona. As he mounted Mercury and rode away, Fiona touched her loose hair, letting the copper strands slip through her fingers. For the first time, she wondered if what had always been her greatest shame might somehow become a source of strength instead. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Fiona spent hours at the school, observing Miss Bennett's teaching methods and familiarizing herself with the curriculum. The current teacher was a kind woman in her 30s who seemed genuinely relieved that a replacement had been found. The children need consistency, she explained as she showed Fiona the schoolroom. And frankly, after teaching for 12 years, I'm ready for a different kind of life. Charles, that's my fiancé, has a cattle ranch up near Fairplay. The school was a single room with rows of desks facing a blackboard, a pot-bellied stove in the corner, and shelves of well-worn books along one wall. 27 students attended, ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. It's challenging teaching so many levels at once, Miss Bennett admitted. But these children are eager to learn. Most of their parents understand the value of education, even in a mining town. Fiona helped with lessons, getting to know the students and their varying abilities. To her relief, the children seemed more curious than frightened by her red hair, especially after word spread about her actions during the wagon incident. On Thursday afternoon, the school board consisting of Mayor Donovan, Reverend Thomas from the Methodist Church, and 3 prominent businessmen observed Fiona teaching a geography lesson. She felt their critical eyes on her as she engaged the students in mapping the Western Territories, but she focused on the eager faces of the children rather than the judgment of the adults. When the lesson concluded, Mayor Donovan asked to speak with Fiona privately. "Miss Valenti," he began formally, "the board has discussed your qualifications at length. We've also taken into account Miss Bennett's recommendation and—" He cleared his throat. "The character you displayed during Tuesday's incident." Fiona waited, hands clasped tightly together. "We would like to offer you the position of Georgetown schoolteacher, effective upon Miss Bennett's departure. The salary is $40 per month, with lodging to be arranged by yourself." Relief and joy surged through Fiona. "Thank you, Mayor Donovan. I accept, and I promise you won't regret your decision." The mayor nodded, still formal but with a hint of approval in his eyes. "There is one condition. As a teacher, you'll be expected to maintain the highest moral standards. Your conduct must be above reproach at all times." "Of course," Fiona agreed, understanding the unspoken message. Don't give the gossipers any ammunition. By Saturday evening, news of Fiona's appointment had spread through Georgetown. At the boarding house, Martha helped her prepare for the church social, lending her a pearl hairpin to secure her carefully arranged curls. "Not hiding tonight," Martha observed with approval as Fiona left some of her hair visible. "Not completely," Fiona admitted. "It's progress." Martha squeezed her hand. "The right people will see you for who you truly are, child. The rest don't matter." Jake arrived promptly at 7, dressed in clean dark trousers, a white shirt, and a string tie, his usual cowboy hat replaced by a more formal Stetson. He stopped short when Fiona descended the stairs, his expression softening into open admiration. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Fiona wore her best dress, a deep emerald silk that her mother had insisted she pack for special occasions. The color intensified both her green eyes and the rich copper of her partially visible hair. "Thank you," she replied, taking his offered arm. "You look quite handsome yourself." The Methodist church hall was decorated with autumn leaves and candles, a small band playing in one corner while tables of food lined another wall. Couples danced in the center, while others chatted in small groups. Conversation lulled briefly when Jake and Fiona entered together. The sight of the solitary rancher escorting the town's new schoolteacher with her unmistakable red hair caused a ripple of surprise and speculation. Reverend Thomas approached them first, his wife beside him. "Miss Valenti, welcome, and Mr. Archer, good to see you at a social function for once. Couldn't miss the chance to dance with the prettiest lady in Colorado Territory," Jake replied, his hand warm against Fiona's back. Mrs. Thomas beamed. "How wonderful! We're so pleased you've joined our community, Miss Valenti. The children need a dedicated teacher." More introductions followed, and Fiona found herself welcomed by many of the parents whose children she would soon teach. There were still guarded looks from some, and she overheard one woman whispering about that red-headed stranger. But the open hostility she'd experienced on arrival had largely subsided. Jake remained at her side, his steady presence both reassuring and thrilling. When the band began a waltz, he turned to her with a questioning smile. "Would you care to dance, Miss Valenti? I thought you'd never ask, Mr. Archer." Jake led her onto the floor with unexpected grace. His hand at her waist was respectful but firm, guiding her through the steps with confidence. "You dance well for a rancher," Fiona teased. "My mother's influence," he explained. "She was from Virginia, educated in the finest schools back east. Insisted I learn proper manners even though we lived miles from anywhere." As they moved around the floor, Fiona felt lighter than she had in years. "Tell me about your ranch," she prompted. Jake's face lit up. "The North Star's been in my family since '59, when my father came west during the first silver strike. He was smart enough to realize that miners need to eat, so he started raising cattle instead of digging for ore." Pride colored his voice. "We've got the best water rights in the county and grazing land that stays green longer than most. It sounds wonderful." "It is, though it's a lot for one man to manage." He looked down at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "The house is too quiet most days." The waltz ended, but they remained on the dance floor, reluctant to break the connection. Jake Archer, socializing like a regular person. A boisterous man approached, clapping Jake on the shoulder. "Must be the end times." Jake's expression tightened slightly. "Frank Crawford. Didn't expect to see you here." Fiona recognized the name, the man who had jeered at her arrival and whom Jake had confronted. Crawford's eyes lingered on Fiona's hair. "Heard you're going to be teaching our children, Miss Valenti. Interesting choice for the school board. Georgetown is fortunate to have someone with Miss Valenti's qualifications," Jake said, his tone carrying a warning. Crawford raised his hands in mock surrender. "No offense meant. Just surprised to see our solitary rancher escorting the new schoolmarm. People might talk. People always talk," Fiona replied evenly. "Especially those with nothing better to do." Jake's laugh was worth the risk of her retort. Crawford's face darkened, but before he could respond, the band struck up a lively reel. "Another dance?" Jake asked, deliberately turning his back on Crawford. They danced until Fiona's cheeks were flushed and her carefully arranged hair began to come loose, more of the vibrant copper spilling around her shoulders. As the evening progressed, she noticed the stares less and less, focusing instead on Jake's stories, his quiet laugh, the way his eyes never left her face. During a break in the dancing, they stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. The October night was crisp, stars blazing overhead with a clarity Fiona had never seen in Boston. "It's magical," she breathed, gazing upward. "That's why my father named our place the North Star Ranch," Jake said, standing close beside her. "He said those stars guided him to this valley, to the place he was meant to be." Something in his voice made Fiona turn to look at him. In the silver moonlight, his expression was open, vulnerable. "What guided you to Georgetown, Fiona?" he asked softly. "Necessity at first," she admitted. "After my parents died, I had nowhere else to go. Aunt Martha was my only living relative willing to take me in." She hesitated, then added, "But now I wonder if there wasn't something else drawing me here. Something I couldn't have named." Jake reached out slowly, touching a strand of her hair that had fallen loose. "Do you know what I thought when I first saw you? Standing there in the street with the sunset catching your hair." Fiona held her breath, shaking her head. "I thought, there she is, the woman I've been waiting for without knowing it." His fingers trailed from her hair to her cheek. "Sounds foolish saying it aloud." "It doesn't," Fiona whispered. "Not foolish at all." Jake leaned forward, his intentions clear. Fiona closed her eyes, heart pounding. "Miss Valenti." Mayor Donovan's voice shattered the moment. "Ah, there you are. And Mr. Archer." They stepped apart guiltily as the mayor approached, his wife on his arm. "We just wanted to congratulate you again on your appointment," Mrs. Donovan said, either oblivious to or ignoring what she had interrupted, "and to invite you to Sunday dinner tomorrow after church." "That's very kind," Fiona managed, struggling to compose herself. "I'd be delighted." "Excellent. We dine at 1 o'clock. Mrs. Donovan smiled, then lowered her voice. "And my dear, you might want to attend to your hair before returning inside. A schoolteacher must always be presentable." As the Donovans walked away, Fiona reached up to her disheveled curls, mortification replacing the magic of the moment before. Jake watched her face fall. "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't let them make you feel ashamed." "It's not shame exactly," Fiona struggled to explain. "It's practicality. I need this position, Jake. I have nothing else." He nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "Then let's get you presentable, schoolteacher." He offered his handkerchief. "Though for what it's worth, I think you're perfect exactly as you are." The warmth of his words carried Fiona through the rest of the evening, even as she carefully repinned her rebellious hair and maintained a proper distance from Jake under the watchful eyes of Georgetown citizens. When he walked her back to the boarding house later, they stopped at the gate, the memory of their interrupted moment hanging between them. "Thank you for a wonderful evening," Fiona said, her hands clasped tightly before her. "When can I see you again?" Jake asked, direct as always. "I'm not sure that's wise. The mayor made it clear that my conduct—" "Hang what Donovan thinks," Jake interrupted, then sighed, running a hand through his hair. "No, you're right. I don't want to compromise your position." Fiona bit her lip, torn between caution and the undeniable pull she felt toward him. "Perhaps we could meet somewhere less public? To talk. I mean," Jake's face brightened. "I could show you the ranch next weekend. Bring you back before dark. All proper-like." "I'd like that." Fiona smiled, then impulsively reached out to squeeze his hand. "Good night, Jake." "Sweet dreams, Fiona." As she watched him walk away, Fiona knew with sudden clarity that her life had irrevocably changed the moment Jake Archer had defended her fiery hair and with it, her very self. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of change. Miss Bennet married her rancher and departed for Fairplay, leaving Fiona in charge of Georgetown School. The children adjusted quickly to their new teacher, most of them responding well to her engaging methods and genuine interest in their progress. True to his word, Jake took Fiona to see the North Star Ranch the Saturday after the social. Martha insisted that Sarah Williams accompany them as a chaperone for propriety's sake. Dear, but the young widow tactfully kept her distance during the tour, allowing Jake and Fiona to talk freely. The ranch exceeded Fiona's expectations. Nestled in a valley with mountains rising on three sides, it encompassed hundreds of acres of grazing land, watered by a clear creek that ran through the property. The main house was substantial, a two-story structure built of local timber, with a broad porch wrapping around three sides. "My father built it big, planning for a large family," Jake explained as he showed her through rooms filled with solid, well-crafted furniture. "He and my mother only had me, though. She died when I was 12, mountain fever." "I'm sorry," Fiona said softly. "My parents have only been gone a year, and sometimes the loss still feels raw." Jake nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It changes, but it never fully goes away. My father always said that grief is the price we pay for loving deeply." They continued the tour, Jake pointing out recent improvements: a new barn, expanded corrals, the vegetable garden he maintained with limited success. "I can grow cattle better than carrots," he admitted with a self-deprecating laugh. "Perhaps you need a gardener's touch," Fiona suggested, running her fingers through the soil. "Or a wife who knows about such things," Jake replied, watching her closely. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibility. Then Sarah called from where she waited by the horses, reminding them of the time, and the moment passed. As autumn progressed into early winter, Jake found reasons to come into town more frequently. He would appear outside the schoolhouse just as Fiona was finishing for the day, offering to walk her back to the boarding house. Sometimes he brought small gifts: wildflowers gathered from the hillsides, a book of poetry he'd found in Denver during a cattle sale, a jar of honey from the hives his nearest neighbor kept. Their courtship, for that's what it had become, though neither had put a name to it, progressed under the watchful eyes of Georgetown. Opinions were divided. Some found the match charming, while others whispered that no good could come from a union between a solitary rancher with a mysterious past and a woman whose fiery hair marked her as different. Fiona herself scarcely dared believe in the feelings growing between them. Her experiences in Boston had taught her that men might be intrigued by her looks initially but rarely stayed once they felt the heat of society's disapproval. Yet Jake seemed impervious to the whispers, his devotion unwavering. In late November, as the first snow dusted the mountain peaks surrounding Georgetown, Jake invited Fiona to dinner at the North Star, this time with Martha as chaperone. "I want to show you what the ranch looks like in winter," he explained. "It's a different kind of beautiful." He was right. The snow-capped mountains, the crisp air that made every breath visible, the way the low winter sun gilded the landscape, it was breathtaking. Jake had prepared the house with care, a fire roaring in the stone hearth, the table set with his mother's china. Martha, after inspecting the domestic arrangements with approval, tactfully occupied herself in the kitchen, allowing Jake and Fiona a measure of privacy in the front parlor. "I've been thinking," Jake said, standing near the fire with Fiona, "about the future." Fiona's heart quickened. "Have you? This place needs more than just me to reach its potential. It needs life, family." He turned to face her fully. "Fiona, I know we haven't known each other long by some standards, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He took her hands in his. "I love you. Your spirit, your kindness, your determination. The way you've won over this town despite their prejudices. The way you make me feel less alone in the world." His voice roughened. "And yes, your beautiful red hair that first made me notice you, the hair that matches the fire I've always felt inside me. The fire that never found its purpose until you arrived." Tears sprang to Fiona's eyes. "Jake, I'm asking if you'll marry me. If you'll make this house a home again. Share my life, build something lasting with me." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a ring, a gold band set with a small ruby. "It was my mother's. My father said the red stone reminded him of her spirit, fiery and precious." Fiona looked at the ring, then at Jake's face, open, vulnerable, filled with love, and knew her answer with absolute certainty. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Jake Archer, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her close, kissing her for the first time, a gentle kiss that quickly deepened, expressing all the longing and joy that words couldn't contain. When they finally parted, both breathless, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the night of the social." "I've wanted you to," Fiona admitted, her hands still clutching his shoulders. Martha cleared her throat from the doorway, but she was smiling broadly. "I take it congratulations are in order?" Jake kept his arm around Fiona's waist. "Mrs. Holloway, I've asked your niece to become my wife, and she's done me the great honor of accepting." Martha wiped tears from her eyes. "Oh, my dears, your mother would be so happy, Fiona. She always worried about you finding someone who would truly see you." The engagement of Georgetown schoolteacher to the owner of the North Star Ranch became the talk of the town. To Fiona's surprise, the response was largely positive. Those who had come to know her during her months of teaching had developed respect for her abilities and character. Jake's standing in the community, always strong due to his fair dealings and readiness to help neighbors in need, lent additional legitimacy to their match. There were still whispers, of course. Crawford and his friends made thinly veiled comments about Jake being bewitched by Fiona's red hair. A few parents expressed concern about having a married woman teach their children, suggesting that Fiona's attention would be divided once she had a household to run. "Nonsense," Mayor Donovan declared at the next town council meeting. "Mrs. Archer, as she will be, can continue teaching as long as she wishes." Finding a qualified teacher willing to stay in Georgetown is difficult enough without creating unnecessary obstacles. The mayor's support, combined with Reverend Thomas's enthusiastic blessing of the match from his pulpit the following Sunday, effectively silenced the remaining critics. Jake and Fiona planned a Christmas wedding partly because neither wanted to wait longer, and partly because it would coincide with the school's winter break, allowing them a short honeymoon before classes resumed in January. As the wedding day approached, Fiona experienced moments of almost painful happiness, balanced by occasional flashes of anxiety. Would she be a good wife? Could she manage a ranch household while continuing to teach? Would Jake eventually tire of defending her against those who judged her by her appearance? Jake himself seemed to sense her doubts. During a quiet evening at the boarding house, while Martha discreetly busied herself in another room, he took Fiona's hands in his. "What's troubling you?" he asked gently. "And don't say nothing, I know that furrow in your brow by now." Fiona smiled despite herself. "Am I that transparent?" "Only to me." He kissed her forehead. "Tell me," she sighed, gathering her courage. "I'm afraid that someday you'll regret choosing me, that the whispers will wear you down, or that I'll disappoint you somehow." Jake's expression grew serious. "Fiona, look at me." He waited until her eyes met his. "Before you came to Georgetown, I was existing, not living. Running the ranch because it was what my father built. Going through each day with nothing to look forward to beyond the next season. The next cattle sale." He touched her cheek. "You brought color back into my world, and not just with your beautiful hair. With your courage, your determination to make a place for yourself despite every obstacle." Tears welled in Fiona's eyes as Jake continued. "As for the whispers, let them talk. Their small-mindedness is their burden to carry, not ours." He grinned suddenly. "Besides, our children will have the most magnificent hair in the territory. Imagine a whole brood of red-headed archers running around the North Star." Children. Fiona hadn't allowed herself to think that far ahead. "At least 3, Jake said confidently. "Maybe more if you're willing. I've always wanted a big family." The vision he painted a home filled with love and laughter, children with fiery hair like hers growing up unashamed, secure in their parents' love, was so beautiful it made her chest ache. "I love you, Jake Archer," she whispered. "More than I knew it was possible to love someone." Their Christmas wedding was small but joyous. The Methodist church was decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons, candles glowing in every window. Fiona wore a gown of ivory silk that Martha and Sarah had helped her make, and in a decision that felt like a personal victory, she wore her copper hair loose around her shoulders, crowned only with a circle of holly berries. When Fiona walked down the aisle to where Jake waited, his face illuminated with love and pride, she felt the last shadows of her old fears falling away. This man had truly seen her from their first meeting. With him, her red hair wasn't a mark of shame but a bond between them, a visible sign of the fire they both carried within. Reverend Thomas spoke of love's endurance, of building a life founded on mutual respect and shared purpose. When it came time for their vows, Jake's voice rang out strong and clear, his promises unequivocal. Fiona's response was equally firm, her heart too full for doubt. The reception, held in the church hall, brought together most of Georgetown's residents. Even those who had initially been suspicious of Fiona seemed caught up in the holiday spirit and the undeniable romance of the occasion. Children from Fiona's school presented the couple with a handmade quilt, each square containing a message or picture from a student. As darkness fell, Jake led his bride toward the waiting sleigh that would take them to the North Star, their home now. Martha embraced Fiona tightly, whispering, "Your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become." The sleigh ride through the snowy landscape was magical, stars overhead, and the only sound the jingling of the horses' harness bells. Jake kept Fiona wrapped in furs against the cold, his arms strong around her shoulders. "Happy, Mrs. Archer?" he asked, his breath making clouds in the frigid air. "Perfectly," she replied, nestling closer to him. "I never imagined I could be this happy." At the ranch, Jake surprised her by lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "Welcome home," he said, setting her gently on her feet in the entrance hall. The house was warm and welcoming, fires burning in the hearths, lamplight casting a golden glow over rooms that no longer seemed empty or too large. Jake's housekeeper, Mrs. Diaz, had prepared the house for their arrival but had discreetly departed, leaving the newlyweds to their privacy. That night, as snow began to fall outside their bedroom window, Fiona discovered another kind of fire, the passionate connection between husband and wife, a joining of bodies and souls that transformed them both. In Jake's arms, she found a belonging she had never known possible, a complete acceptance that healed wounds she had carried since childhood. Later, as they lay together in the peaceful darkness, Jake's fingers traced patterns in her hair spread across the pillow. "Do you know," he murmured, "I used to dream about a woman with hair like living flame, even as a boy, long before I met you." Fiona turned to face him. "Really?" He nodded, his expression thoughtful in the faint light from the banked fire. "My mother used to tell me stories about her grandmother, a woman from Scotland with hair like the heart of a fire," she'd say. "In our family, red hair was considered lucky, a sign of special spirit." He smiled, touching Fiona's cheek. "When I saw you that first day in Georgetown, standing so brave despite those fools mocking you, it was like my dream had walked into the waking world." Fiona thought of all the years she'd spent trying to hide her hair, to make herself invisible. "I wish I'd known you sooner," she whispered. "We found each other exactly when we were meant to," Jake said with quiet certainty. "Not a moment too soon or too late." As winter settled over the Colorado mountains, Fiona and Jake established the rhythms of their shared life. On weekdays, Jake would drive Fiona into town for school in the mornings, using the opportunity to conduct business in Georgetown before returning to the ranch. In the afternoons, he'd appear outside the schoolhouse to take her home, the children giggling at the sight of their teacher's handsome husband arriving punctually each day. Evenings were spent in comfortable domesticity, sharing meals, reading aloud by the fire, discussing the day's events, and planning for the future. Jake taught Fiona about ranch operations, while she brought music back into the house, playing the piano that had stood silent since his mother's death. Weekends were devoted to ranch work and making the house truly theirs. They redecorated several rooms, incorporating treasured items Fiona had brought from Boston alongside the Archer family heirlooms. The bedroom that had been Jake's as a child was refreshed with new paint and curtains, both of them silently acknowledging its potential future purpose. By spring, Fiona had settled fully into her dual roles as teacher and rancher's wife. The children thrived under her guidance, and the school board extended her contract for the following year with increased salary, a clear indication of their satisfaction. The ranch, too, prospered under the partnership of husband and wife. Jake's cattle operation expanded, benefiting from Fiona's organizational skills and the additional hands they were able to hire thanks to her teaching income. The vegetable garden flourished under her care, and she began a small orchard that would bear fruit in years to come. In April, as wildflowers carpeted the valley, Fiona confirmed what she had suspected for several weeks: she was expecting their first child, due in late autumn. She told Jake on a Sunday morning as they sat on the porch watching the sun rise over the eastern ridge. "I have news," she said, taking his hand and placing it over her still flat stomach. Jake's expression transformed from confusion to wonder in an instant. "A baby? You're certain?" Fiona nodded, tears of joy blurring her vision. "Dr. Foster confirmed it yesterday while you were meeting with the cattle buyers." Jake gathered her into his arms, laughing and crying at once. "A baby," he repeated, awed. "Our child." Their shared joy was tempered only by the inevitable adjustments to their plans. Fiona would need to resign her teaching position by the end of the school year, though the board might have permitted her to continue until closer to her confinement. She and Jake agreed that the daily trips to town would become too taxing as her pregnancy progressed. "The school has been my anchor," Fiona admitted. "I'll miss the children terribly." "You'll have our child to teach," Jake reminded her. "And perhaps, when our family is a bit older, you could take on private students here at the ranch. Or even start a small school for the ranching families in this valley." The possibility brightened Fiona's outlook. "You wouldn't mind having our home invaded by other people's children?" Jake kissed her forehead. "Our home will always be open to those seeking knowledge. It's one of the many things I love about you, your passion for helping others learn and grow." News of the upcoming Archer baby spread through Georgetown with predictable speed. While most reactions were positive gifts and good wishes arriving from friends and former students, there were still those who couldn't resist making snide comments. "Let's hope it doesn't have that witch's hair," Fiona overheard Crawford saying outside the Mercantile one afternoon. Before she could respond, Sarah Williams stepped in. "Mr. Crawford, I believe you owe Mrs. Archer an apology." Her voice carried clearly in the busy street. "She's brought nothing but good to this town, educating our children, supporting her husband's business that employs local men, participating in every charitable effort." She folded her arms. "And frankly, I think her beautiful red hair would be a blessing for any child." Crawford, faced with the unexpected defense from the normally quiet widow, mumbled something that might have been an apology before hurrying away. Sarah turned to Fiona with a smile. "Don't let fools like that upset you, especially now. It's not good for the baby." "Thank you," Fiona said, genuinely touched. "It means a great deal to have friends willing to speak up." "Times are changing," Sarah replied, "even in Georgetown. And you and Jake have shown many of us that judging people by appearance rather than character is a fool's game." As summer progressed into autumn, Fiona's body changed with her advancing pregnancy. Jake watched over her with tender concern, insisting she rest frequently and hiring additional help for the household chores. Their evenings often found them sitting together on the porch swing, Jake's hand resting on Fiona's growing belly, feeling their child's movements. "What shall we name him?" Jake asked one such evening in early October. "Or her," he added quickly, though Fiona knew he secretly hoped for a son. "If it's a boy, I thought perhaps Edward, after my father," Fiona suggested. "We could call him Eddie." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "Edward Jacob Archer. It has a good sound." He ran his fingers through Fiona's hair, spread loose across her shoulders as she always wore it now at home. "And if it's a girl?" Fiona had been considering this carefully. "What about Ruby? For the fire in her spirit and the stone in my engagement ring." "Ruby." Jake tested the name, his expression softening. "Ruby Archer. Perfect for a girl with her mother's hair and determination." The baby, however, had plans of its own. On a clear, cold day in late October, 2 weeks before Fiona's expected time, her labor began suddenly and progressed with alarming speed. Jake, panic barely concealed beneath his calm exterior, sent a ranch hand racing for Dr. Foster while he helped Fiona to their bedroom. Mrs. Diaz, who had assisted at many births, took charge of the practical arrangements, setting water to boil and gathering clean linens. "Too fast," Fiona gasped as another contraction seized her. "The baby's coming too fast, Jake." Jake held her hand, his face pale but resolute. "You're the strongest woman I know, Fiona Archer. You can do this." He kissed her forehead, damp with perspiration. "And I'm right here with you. I won't leave your side." Dr. Foster arrived just in time, his experienced hands guiding Fiona through the final stages of labor. As the sun set behind the mountains, casting the bedroom in golden light, their son entered the world with a lusty cry. "A fine boy, dear," Foster announced, placing the swaddled infant in Fiona's arms. With quite a head of hair, too. Jake leaned close, his eyes wide with wonder as he beheld his son's small face and the unmistakable copper-red fuzz covering his tiny head. "He has your hair," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "Poor child," Fiona said, but she was smiling through her tears. Jake shook his head firmly. Lucky child, to have that visible sign of his mother's fire and spirit. He touched the baby's cheek with a gentle finger. "Welcome to the world, Edward Jacob Archer. You come from strong stock on both sides." As news of Eddie's birth and his distinctive hair coloring spread through Georgetown and the surrounding ranches, gifts and visitors arrived at the North Star. Even Mayor Donovan and his wife made the journey, bringing a handmade wooden cradle and their sincere congratulations. "He's a fine boy," the mayor declared, peering at the infant. "Got his father's chin and his mother's." He hesitated, then smiled. "His mother's remarkable hair. You must be very proud." "We are," Jake said, standing tall beside Fiona's chair where she held their son. "Proud of our perfect boy and grateful for the blessing he represents." Not everyone was so gracious, of course. There were still whispers about that red-headed baby, and predictions that he would be as wild as fire itself. But increasingly, such comments were met with disapproval from the majority of Georgetown citizens, who had come to respect the Archers and reject the old superstitions. As Eddie grew from newborn to infant to toddler, his personality emerged a blend of Jake's quiet determination and Fiona's quick intelligence. His hair remained vibrantly red, drawing comments wherever Fiona took him. But unlike her own childhood experiences, Eddie rarely heard unkind words. If someone did make a thoughtless remark, they quickly found themselves facing the united front of the Archer family and their many friends in the community. The North Star Ranch continued to prosper. Jake's innovative breeding program produced cattle particularly well suited to the Colorado climate, while Fiona's orchard began yielding its first fruits. They built additional rooms onto the house as their family grew. Ruby joined her brother 2 years after his birth, her hair as fiery as his, followed by Thomas 3 years later, the only one of their children to inherit Jake's darker coloring. Fiona's dream of establishing a small school on the ranch became reality when Eddie reached school age. Rather than sending him alone into Georgetown each day, she invited the children from neighboring ranches to join him for lessons in a converted outbuilding. The North Star School quickly gained a reputation for excellence, with students often outperforming their town counterparts in annual examinations. As the years passed, Georgetown itself evolved from a rough mining town into a more established community. The silver mines eventually played out, but unlike many boom towns that became ghost towns, Georgetown reinvented itself as a supply center for the ranching operations that had taken root in the surrounding valleys. The Archer family, with their successful ranch and school, became pillars of this transformed community. On a warm summer evening in 1896, 20 years after Fiona's arrival in Georgetown, she and Jake sat on their porch watching their children and grandchildren playing in the yard. Eddie, now a young man of 19, had his father's build and his mother's red hair, which gleamed in the setting sun as he chased his youngest niece across the grass. Ruby, beautiful and confident at 17, sat nearby sketching the scene, her artistic talent having blossomed under her mother's encouragement. Thomas, 14 and already showing Jake's skill with horses, was demonstrating a rope trick to his admiring nephews. "Did you ever imagine this?" Jake asked, his hand finding Fiona's as it had countless times over their years together. His hair was silver now at the temples, lines of laughter bracketing his still bright eyes. "Not in my wildest dreams," Fiona admitted. At 42, her own hair remained vibrant, with only a few strands of silver appearing like threads of moonlight among the fire. When I stepped off that stagecoach, I was just hoping to survive, to find some small place where I could belong. And instead, you built all this. Jake gestured to encompass not just their home and land, but the family they had created together. We built it, Fiona corrected, squeezing his hand. From the moment you stood up for me for my hair, of all things you changed everything. Jake smiled, the same smile that still made her heart quicken after 20 years of marriage. I meant what I said that day, you know, about your hair matching the fire in my soul. He touched a strand that had escaped her loose braid. It still does. It always will. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, casting the valley in purple shadow, their grandchildren came running to the porch, clamoring for a story before bedtime. Fiona gathered the youngest onto her lap, her voice soft as she began a tale she had told many times, the story of a young woman with flame-colored hair who traveled west seeking refuge and found, instead, a love that transformed her life. It was their story. A story not just of love between a man and woman, but of a community's journey from superstition to acceptance, from fear of difference to celebration of it. As Fiona looked around at the faces of her family, some with hair as red as her own, others with Jake's darker coloring, all of them secure in the knowledge of their worth and place in the world, she felt a profound gratitude. The fire that had once marked her as an outsider had become her greatest strength, the visible sign of a spirit that refused to be diminished by others' narrow minds. And in Jake Archer, she had found the one person who had seen that fire not as something to fear, but as a reflection of his own passionate soul. And they lived happily ever after? Her youngest granddaughter prompted when Fiona paused in her storytelling. Fiona met Jake's eyes across the gathering darkness, seeing in them the same love that had sustained them through 2 decades of joy and hardship, triumph and challenge. "Yes, my darling," she answered, her heart full. "They absolutely did."